Welcome to a deep dive into the early American Republic.
Yeah.
A time bursting with political intrigue, shifting racial dynamics, and, figures like Thomas Jefferson,
Right.
who are way more complex than their textbook portrayals. We're going to uncover those surprising, forgotten stories that reveal the true face of a nation kind of finding its feet.
It's interesting you use that phrase, finding its feet,
Yeah.
because while this period is often romanticized, like it's an era of good feelings,
Right.
it was a chaotic mess of change and conflict.
Yeah.
And our sources today really reveal just how much the early American Republic struggled to reconcile, these lofty ideals
Yeah.
with the realities of the time.
Okay, let's unpack this. I was struck by how many different groups were battling for power, kind of vying for recognition in the early republic.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get stuck in that Federalists versus Democratic Republicans mindset.
Right.
But it was so much more than that.
Beneath that surface level, you had enslaved and free Black Americans, Native American nations, women,
Right.
all pushing for recognition and pushing their own visions of freedom and equality.
Right.
And what's so fascinating is how their efforts, often overlooked in traditional textbooks, had this profound impact on the nation's political culture.
And speaking of impact, the Haitian Revolution, that wasn't just some far-off event, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the way I see it, that sent shockwaves through America.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine being a white slaveholder in America and hearing about enslaved people successfully overthrowing their oppressors and forming a new nation.
Right.
Terrifying, right?
Yeah.
But for Black Americans, and particularly those yearning for freedom, Haiti became this beacon of hope.
Wow.
Figures like David Walker, John Russwurm, they held it up as proof that people of color, when given the opportunity, could achieve incredible things.
Okay, but then you have someone like Thomas Jefferson, a supposed champion of liberty, who writes in his notes on the state of Virginia that Black people are intellectually inferior.
hmm
Talk about a contradiction.
It exposes the hypocrisy at the heart of the early republic, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Here you have the author of the Declaration of Independence, a document proclaiming that all men are created equal, yet Jefferson himself couldn't reconcile those ideals
Yep.
with his own, deeply flawed views on race.
And sadly, he wasn't alone. This whole idea of racial difference was fueled by the science of the time.
Yes.
Like the theories surrounding Henry Moss.
Right.
He was an enslaved man who became a medical marvel when his skin started turning white.
People were obsessed. Imagine being Henry Moss,
I know, right?
thrust into this bizarre spotlight,
Yeah.
and your very being is used to justify racist ideologies.
It's awful.
Yeah, some, like Samuel Stanhope Smith, believed social progress could whiten non-white races.
Wow.
Others, like Charles Caldwell, took it even further, arguing for completely separate creations based on race.
It makes you question the whole idea of progress during this era.
Yeah.
But kind of shifting gears a bit here, how did everyday Americans express their political beliefs during this time? Was it more than just voting?
Oh, absolutely. Take, for example, the celebrations surrounding Jefferson's election. You had people using everyday objects, songs, even specific types of foods as political symbols.
Really?
It's fascinating how deeply intertwined politics was with everyday life.
And what about women during this period? They were still denied equal rights.
Right.
But I imagine they still found ways to make their voices heard.
They did. This is where the concept of Republican motherhood comes in.
Okay.
Think of it as this kind of double-edged sword. Women are being told, okay, you're vital to shaping future citizens.
Right.
You were responsible for instilling the values of liberty and virtue in your children.
Right.
It gave them purpose and influence, but also reinforced this primary role as wives and mothers.
It seems like this emphasis on unity and these shared values often clashed with the reality of westward expansion and the treatment of Native Americans.
Absolutely, and no story exemplifies this struggle more powerfully than that of Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa.
Right.
They understood that the only way to resist American encroachment was through Native unity, a united front against a common enemy.
And Tecumseh really took that to heart, didn't he? Traveling tirelessly, uniting different Native American nations under this common goal of fighting for their land.
He was a brilliant strategist and a captivating orator. He understood the gravity of the situation. It wasn't just about individual tribes defending their territory.
Right.
It was about the survival of Native American culture and sovereignty in the face of this, relentless expansion.
It's a story that still resonates today.
Yeah.
It reminds us that the fight for land rights and self-determination is an ongoing battle, one with really deep roots in our nation's past.
Mhm.
But this tension over westward expansion and the desire to break free from British influence,
Yeah.
it eventually kind of boils over into the War of 1812.
A war that, in many ways, really exposed the contradictions at the heart of this young republic.
Right.
A nation preaching freedom while actively denying it to others.
So this tension over westward expansion, this desire to break free from British influence,
Yep.
it eventually boils over into the War of 1812.
Right.
So what were some of the key issues that finally ignited this conflict?
Well, you have to remember, the United States at this point is still like a teenager on the world stage.
Okay.
Testing boundaries, trying to assert its independence.
Right.
And Great Britain,
Yeah.
they weren't quite ready to let go of their former colonies.
Right.
They still had a strong presence in North America, both economically, militarily.
Okay, so it's this classic power struggle.
Yeah.
But what were the specific triggers? I know impressment of American sailors was a huge deal.
Huge.
Yeah.
Imagine you're sailing on an American merchant ship,
Okay.
just going about your business,
Right.
when suddenly you're boarded by the British Navy.
Oh, no.
They accuse you being a deserter, drag you off your ship, and force you into service on a British warship. Thousands of American sailors suffered this fate.
That must have been terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a violation on multiple levels, right?
Your freedom, your rights.
Your freedom, your rights, even your national identity.
Exactly. It's like a direct assault on American sovereignty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse,
Okay.
the British were also stirring up trouble on the western frontier.
Right, by arming and supporting Native American tribes who were resisting westward expansion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So from the American perspective, it looks like Britain was actively trying to undermine them,
Well,
to keep them weak and divided.
okay.
And it played right into the hands of those who were already itching for a fight.
So the War of 1812 becomes this culmination of frustrations, like a breaking point.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting to me is how did this, ragtag young nation, how did they fare against, the mighty British Empire?
Right.
Talk about an underdog story.
It is a classic underdog story. And like any good underdog story, there are moments of triumph, there are moments of despair.
Right.
Early on, the U.S. Navy, they scored some impressive victories, particularly those involving the USS Constitution.
Ah, yes. Old Ironsides. Every school kid learns about her exploits.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting how those certain events become these cultural touchstones, these symbols of national pride.
The Constitution's victories were celebrated throughout the nation.
I bet.
It was a much-needed morale boost.
Okay.
And then you have Andrew Jackson emerging as a national hero after the Battle of New Orleans.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? I mean, you can't talk about the War of 1812 without mentioning the burning of Washington, D.C.
That was a huge blow.
Yeah.
Both strategically and symbolically.
Right.
The British marched right into the Capitol and torched the White House, the Capitol building.
I can't even imagine.
It was a humiliating defeat.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the United States, they managed to hold their own.
They did, but if nothing really changed, if it was kind of a stalemate,
Yeah.
why is the War of 1812 considered so significant?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not about the tangible outcomes.
Okay.
It's about the intangible.
Right.
The shifts in perception, in identity.
Okay.
The War of 1812, for all its complexities, its contradictions, it forged a stronger sense of national unity and purpose.
It's like this coming-of-age story.
Exactly.
For the young republic. A trial by fire that, while messy and inconclusive, ultimately kind of solidified their sense of self.
Precisely. It proved to themselves and to the world that they were a force to be reckoned with.
They weren't going anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it fostered this newfound confidence that would have far-reaching consequences.
And I imagine this newfound confidence also had implications for the nation's relationship with the Native Americans.
Absolutely. With the British out of the picture, at least temporarily,
Right.
American westward expansion, it intensified.
Right.
The War of 1812 didn't directly cause the displacement of Native Americans, but it certainly helped to create the conditions that made it possible.
Right, like it opened the door.
Exactly.
A tragic irony. The very war that solidified American independence ultimately comes at the expense of another people's freedom and sovereignty.
Yeah.
But kind kind of shifting gears a bit here.
Okay.
The early American Republic, it wasn't just about wars and political conflicts.
Right.
There were also these really interesting social movements kind of bubbling beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And one that caught my attention was this idea of Republican motherhood.
Okay.
What exactly did that, like, entail?
So remember, women in the early republic had very limited rights.
Right.
They couldn't vote, they couldn't hold office.
Right.
Their lives were largely confined to the domestic sphere.
Okay.
But within that sphere, they wielded considerable influence.
Because they were the mothers.
Exactly.
Raising the next generation of citizens.
Exactly. And Republican motherhood capitalized on that.
Yeah.
It argued that women had a crucial role to play in shaping the future of the republic by raising their sons to be virtuous, patriotic citizens.
Wow.
And their daughters to be equally virtuous and patriotic mothers.
So it's empowering, in a sense.
Right.
It's recognizing their importance
Right.
in shaping the nation's character.
It gave them a sense of purpose and influence
Okay.
within a system that otherwise denied them, direct political power.
Right.
But it also reinforced their primary roles as wives and mothers,
Right.
further confining them to the domestic sphere.
A classic double-edged sword. It's
Yeah.
like you get some, but you're
Thanks.
also kind of put in your place.
Right.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of major, like, social and political upheaval.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we're talking about a nation grappling with westward expansion, slavery, the rights of its citizens. It's a lot.
And we haven't even touched on the many contributions and struggles of people of color during this time. I mean, we tend to focus on the experiences of white Americans.
Right.
But the story of the early republic is vastly incomplete without acknowledging the vital roles played by Black Americans and Native Americans.
It's a good reminder that the ideals of liberty and equality, so central to the American experiment, were often applied selectively and unevenly.
Yeah, it's easy to look back at this period and just kind of shake our heads at some of the things people believed.
Yeah.
Especially, regarding race.
Right.
But like you said, these ideals of liberty and equality, they weren't always applied fairly.
Right. And you have to try to, step into their shoes a little.
Right.
I mean, there's a reason it's called historical context, right?
Yep.
And while we can't excuse the injustices of the past,
Right.
we can try to understand the prevailing social and political forces that shaped people's beliefs and actions.
Right.
And even within that context,
Yeah.
there were voices of dissent. You
Yeah.
know, there were people who were challenging the status quo, right? Like Benjamin Banneker, who challenged Thomas Jefferson
Exactly.
directly on his views of Black intellectual inferiority.
He sends him a copy of his almanac, fills with his astronomical calculations and writings, and it's like, can you imagine receiving that
Yeah.
from someone you've deemed intellectually inferior?
It's like, okay,
It must have been quite a confrontation.
I can't even imagine.
And though Jefferson praises Banneker's intellect, he ultimately kind of clings to his prejudices.
It goes to show how deeply entrenched these beliefs were, even in the minds of, those who consider themselves enlightened.
Yeah.
And it's not like these issues magically disappeared after the early republic, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, the legacy of slavery,
Right.
the fight for equal rights, these are ongoing struggles.
And that's why deep dives like this are so important.
Yeah.
By digging into these historical sources, by challenging our assumptions,
Right.
by looking at multiple perspectives, we gain this kind of richer understanding, not just of the past, but also of the present.
It's like that saying, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it.
Right.
But it's almost like those who don't understand the past can't possibly untangle the present.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's by confronting the complexities of our history,
Right.
both the triumphs and the tragedies, that we become more informed and engaged citizens.
Yeah.
I think better equipped to face the challenges of today.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the early American Republic,
Yes.
what is one key takeaway
Okay.
that you want our listener to kind of carry with them?
I want them to understand this. The early American Republic, for all its flaws, was a period of immense creativity and dynamism.
Okay.
It was messy,
Yeah.
contradictory,
Right.
often tragic, yes.
Yeah.
But it was also a time when people were passionately debating and fighting for their vision of a better future.
It's a good reminder that history is never really a settled matter, right?
Yeah.
It's an ongoing conversation.
Constantly evolving as we uncover new perspectives. We challenge these old assumptions.
And it's a conversation we all have a responsibility to participate in.
Absolutely. So for you, our listener, one final thought to ponder. As we've kind of explored these tensions between ideals and reality in the early American Republic.
Yeah.
The fight for equality, the struggle for power. How do those same tensions continue to shape our world today? What can we learn from the past to create a more just and equitable future? That's something to chew on until our next deep dive.